So, hello everybody. Today I'm going to do a review of the Lord of the Rings role-playing game 5e. This is the version that Free League has published, and this is the base game rule set. So, for those of you who have already watched the unboxing of the starter set that comes out to complement this, or I guess this may complement the starter set, there is something that I have to say upfront. In my starter set review, where I also pointed out that this is one of the products you don't need, they have decided to use combat rules which are built around stances, which is the same type of combat rule that they also employ for the One Ring, which is not 5th edition based, but which is the old Cubicle 7 rules that were created by the guy who made the War of the Ring board game. And I really detest them and I really hate them. So I was very surprised when I read this book that here they actually state that, first of all, you need 5th edition to play this. So without 5th edition and probably the 2014 rules, I don't know if this is compliant with the 2024 rules. There are some differences, but I guess both would do. The one thing that they state in this rule book is that their rules replace or enhance or change the rules of 5th edition to make them compatible with the Lord of the Rings world as they see it and as they shape it in their game, which makes perfect sense. But they also state that combat rules are largely not affected by this, which basically means that you would use the 5th edition combat rules, like with regard to movement, with regard to actions, with regard to things like attacks of opportunity, and all of this stance nonsense is no longer part of this. So I'm not sure why they would have the stance system in the box set, which would put lots of people off because it's really bad. If they then say, well, actually, when you play the 5th edition, the Lord of the Rings role-playing game, you actually will not be using any specifically 5e, specifically Lord of the Rings related combat rules, but you will be using 5e. So color me confused. Maybe they got so much backlash from people going, well, you know, the combat system sucks. So if we're going to play 5th edition rules, then please give us decent combat rules. And so when they brought out the book, they decided to do it differently. But just for those of you who saw my first review, and I'm going to stop showing the book, and you were put off by the fact that it's got the stance rules, you can get this book and you will be able to play and not worry about stances, but you will be able to use 5th edition combat rules. So what's in this book? Well, this book is actually a complete rule set that you can use if you want to experience the world of Tolkien as the authors of this conceive of, using 5th edition rules. And I think the best way to talk about this is to discuss what the authors of this rule book consider to be important parts of Tolkien's work from the point of view of a role-playing game. Because in this case, it's not the rules that influence the world building, but it's the world that has already been built and has been interpreted by the people who created the rule set in a certain way. And they have built rules that will be usable when you try to live in the world as they see it. Now, this sounds complicated, but it'll become clear in a moment. So, according to the authors, an important part of Tolkien's narrative is traveling, journeying. So it's not just arriving at a certain point and things happening there, but actually moving from A to B is part of the experience and therefore warrants its own rule set. And I actually agree with that. And I think Tolkien is best in those areas where he talks about how people travel. So the Fellowship of the Ring is really just a travel account, it's a travel account. And it's where I think his writing is at its best. And the idea that there are humanoids that are tiny and they are in this huge, vast emptiness of space that is a Middle-earth at the end of the Third Age. I mean, it was never very populated anyway, but it's especially depopulated in Eriador at the end of the Third Age. And that you basically journey for days or even weeks without meeting anyone or anything because there is nothing there, is important. And is also character building and is also a way for the protagonists in the books to see where they fit into the grand scheme of things. Mainly, they are unimportant little midgets, and it's really all about the everlasting ardor until it comes to an end, and then even the elves will die. And in order to reflect this, they have come up in this version, but also in all previous versions that were created by this team of authors with journey rules. Now, the journey rules deal with, on the one hand, certain roles that people from the group will take. They will be associated with rolls, ROLLs, against certain DCs to see how well they are performing in their roles. That would be hunting, scouting, the traveling, and also making camp. And they will inform what's going to happen to your party in conjunction with the environment through which they travel, and also the basically season during which they travel. Because for those of you who are old school like myself, a lot of this will remind you of the good old days when we were hex crawling, because everything in Tolkien starts with a map, and so does the 5th edition for this as well. You have a map, and that's the player map, and the players decide where they want to go, and they point it out to the DM, and then, or the lore master in this case, and then the lore master will consult their own map, and that map will detail what the environment is like. So is it dangerous, very dangerous? Is it not dangerous at all? And then depending on this, there are different DCs and also different ways in which the travel can be influenced by external factors. And then the characters will take on the roles of scout and of whatever, and then they will roll against certain DCs. And depending on how well they roll, they will then have or not have encounters of some kind. So that is a very important part of the way they see the world, and I happen to agree with them. I do think that traveling is a character building exercise here in The Lord of the Rings, and changes the way you are, because it changes the way you perceive your own surroundings, knowing full well that we're talking about a world where most people don't travel very much. I mean, even most hobbits wouldn't have been to every single part of the Shire. People from Bree wouldn't have traveled very far at all, especially in those days when the land was pretty much devoid of peoples, of the free peoples, because Eriador was pretty much empty. You do have the dwarves that tend to travel a lot between the different still existing dwarven settlements. The elves, yes, we all know that at the end of the day, they will all end up traveling west, so they would travel, maybe not as far, because you have like for example, Thranduil's people who basically just live in Mirkwood, they would be traveling through Mirkwood, but they wouldn't really necessarily leave it and travel great distances. The elves in Rivendell wouldn't necessarily leave Rivendell. The elves in Lothlorien wouldn't necessarily leave Lothlorien, except for, of course, those ones that are emissaries or hunters, or even like hunting the enemy, like Eladan and Elrohir. And yes, Arwen isn't an only child. She has two brothers who are very important in the narrative, although they're completely left out in the movies. They travel far and wide together with the Rangers, and especially also Aragorn, to find out what the enemy is up to. So they would be traveling. But the normal elf, dwarf, well, maybe with the exception of the dwarves, because they have been pretty much unsettled, don't travel. The Bardings don't really leave. The people of Dale don't really leave their places, except for the ones that are distance merchants. But again, it's not everybody. The normal person, regardless of which race they belong to, doesn't necessarily travel that much. Which brings us to the next question. Since it's Tolkien's world, what are playable races? Well, you've got humans, you've got dwarves, you've got elves, and you've got hobbits, of course. And there are different types of elves. There are the elves of Lindon. There are the elves of the high elves as well. You have different types of dwarves, and you also have different types of hobbits. You have the human beings are the most diverse. You have the Rangers of the North. You've got the Bardings. There are the men of Bree. Well, men in terms of people of Bree that are humans of Bree. Then you also have the men of Dale as well. So, and they are all different in some ways, even the way they look. So, for example, the men of Bree are not very tall, whereas the Rangers of the North, being descendants of Westerness, are very tall and are very wiry, whereas the men of Bree are a little more maybe stoutly and that kind of thing. So they also look slightly differently. The way is slightly different. The way the hobbits are described, they're also different. There are 3 types of hobbits, 3 hobbit ancestries. They're all described in the book, and they also look slightly different, differently, and they also behave slightly differently. Some of them really like boats, which is very unusual and abhorrent to everybody else. So you can choose between those races, and then of course you have classes. These classes are of course different from the classes you would see in 5th edition, because since there is no magic in Middle-earth, and you will say, yeah, but Gandalf is actually an angel type creature. He's a Maya, so he's different. And the elves do work magic in some shape or form, but it's not throwing a fireball. So you can actually see a development and evolution from the Cubicle 7 5th edition, Adventures in Middle-earth, to the Lord of the Rings 5th edition by Free Ligan. In the 5th edition version from Cubicle 7, they tell you that you can use spells if you want this, if your players want to work magic. And they have taken a very reduced list of 5th edition and said, you know, if you really want to use magic, use these spells. And those spells are usually druid spells, which makes sense, but there are also others in there. There are some cleric spells in there. When I looked at the spell list, thought it was an interesting take on things. I would have reduced it even further, but you know, they just decided to go with this. In this book and in this version, there is no magic at all. You will not find a single spell in this book. They have something that they call magical successes, which is kind of, I mean, people have criticized it for being probably the laziest way of doing magic in any system, where basically for some reason or another, somebody gets an automatic success and then it's a magical success. I'm in 2 minds about this. I actually don't mind not using magic at all. It really depends on your group. If you're going to use magic, then I would say it's very easy to put it in. I would reduce it greatly. And I would reduce it to things that probably some of the bard spells that are, and some of the cleric spells that are healing related, but not too much either. But definitely no offense spells, because that really doesn't work, because as soon as you introduce magic for your player characters, you will also have to introduce it for the foes, because otherwise there's going to be a complete imbalance. But since songs are so important to Tolkien, we must remember that the Ainur actually sing Middle-earth into being. Song creates, song can shape, so song can heal. And we also have the quote from The Lord of the Rings where it says that the hands of the king are the hands of the healer, which is why Aragorn is very good at healing, because he's got the hands of the king. So and that's definitely, you could say that's kind of some form of herbological magic, whatever. So I think you could have some form of magic in there. You could basically disguise it in the form of songs. And they do have songs here that the group can basically compose. And I think it's just one per type. So there's a battle song, there's a walking song. And when you sing them, for a certain period of time, you get a bonus to certain roles. So this is some kind of magic. And I think there you could also think about how you might want to expand this if your group feels that they want certain kinds of magic. But I believe that if somebody really wants to play in the world of Tolkien, they should simply accept that it's not the Sword Coast, that you cannot actually have Sacred Flame or Toll the Dead, because it simply doesn't exist. You can't have Fireball, you can't have Polymorph, because they do not exist in this world. And if you are going to play in this world, then you just have to accept that the world building is more important than anything else. And the world building, I will say, in this book is very good. They take what is essential to Tolkien's work and translate it into game mechanics. And I really like how they did it. There's also the mechanic of fellowship points. The fellowship points depend on the number of people in the party, as well as if they have a patron and who that patron is. And you can use them as a common resource to get a reroll, essentially, which is really good. But once they're spent, it takes time for them to recover. They also have the mechanic of the fellowship, the fellowship phase, where after an adventure, usually during the winter time, everybody returns home. They return to their safe haven, and the safe haven is also important because that's where they can recover. So, for example, resting and having a long rest doesn't work like it does in the normal version of 5th edition. On the contrary, a short rest lasts 8 hours, and you can use that to spend hit dice, but you cannot actually have a long rest every 8 hours. So basically, long rests can only happen if you are in a safe space, so not while traveling, which of course means hit points and stuff. Since there is no magic, since there are no magical healing implements or spells or whatnot, are something that you need to look after. So this is a lot more deadly, and so almost an old school Renaissance type of game, because it's a lot more deadly. And in the fellowship phase, where you basically remove yourselves to the safe haven, everybody has the possibility of engaging in a fellowship activity. That can be to name an heir and to start investing in their training, because obviously at some point you are too old to adventure, and then you have a new character already at hand that you can basically pass the baton to. They can also be situational. So for example, in one of the Cubicle 7 books, there is the fellowship phase activity where they can help the Rangers of the North fortify a little island in the Brandywine, a little bit north of Brandywine Bridge, on the border of the Shire, so that they can basically use it as a lookout towards the north to make sure that no enemies cross the Brandywine that way. So this could be something that you can engage in. So depending on the place where you're at, you might find something, and then there are generic ones in the book as well. There is also the idea of corruption, which mechanics-wise works a lot like madness or craziness in or mental breakdowns in Call of Cthulhu Delta Green, where basically as you witness things that are happening to you, or as you are interacting with the world and maybe even doing misdeeds, because you are good, you are lawful good, you are like, you would never do anything bad, but if you do something bad, you will earn badness, if you like. And if you earn too much, then you will suffer bouts of madness, and then everything resets, but you will also retain scars. And if you have too many scars, then your character becomes unplayable because they have succumbed to the shadow. And that's something that I really like. You can also try and heal those scars in the fellowship phase. Not always is that possible, but sometimes it is. And it kind of shows how you, as a good person, slowly become drawn into the quagmire that is the evil spreading from Mordor, and how it affects you and how it permeates everything. And I really like that. I think that's very thematic. This is also complemented by an optional rule called the Hunt, where basically the more prominent your group becomes, so basically, and also depending on who's in the group, if it's just hobbits, then the hunt level is very low. And again, here, for those of you who know any of the board games associated with the Lord of the Rings, this idea of becoming more and more conspicuous, becoming more and more visible, is incorporated here. So basically, if you've got high elves in the group, then you are more visible than if it's just a couple of lowly hobbits that nobody knows about. But also, as you start becoming more and more prominent in the fight against the dark shadow, the shadow becomes aware of you, and the Eye of Sauron will start searching for you, and that can have certain ramifications and in-game effects. That's an optional rule, and they also say that this may be something that is too much for some groups, and they definitely say don't do it when you're first starting out. Wait until the group has established itself and understands everything else and understands how to live in the world of 5th edition Lord of the Rings before you introduce this, and then also discuss it with the group. But that's something that I really, really like. With regard to what kind of classes you can play, I've touched upon that. So there's the scholar, there's the warden. There are all kinds of classes that you can play. So the scholar is more of an int and wisdom-based class, and then you have like the fighter, the champion. So it's much reduced when you compare it to 5th edition, but it's very true to Tolkien. Because, you don't have any magical classes, so they're gone. And, there's the messenger class, for example. And the way they are expressed in the rules is very, very nice and very understandable and graspable. And in my opinion, really easy to get used to. They've also made a couple of changes to the skill set that from 5th edition. And that is mainly to do with the journey phase, where they've basically split out the survival. They've taken the survival skill and split it out and divided into several different skills to account for the different things that you what you would be doing in the journey phase. So I did say that you don't need to buy the 5th edition starter set. And considering that they even have the wrong combat rules in there, I would again tell you, don't buy it. If you want to play in the Lord of the Rings setting with 5th edition rules, with a group that wants to experience the Lord of the Rings and Middle-earth in a way that is very true to Tolkien's essence, I would really recommend this book, and I would really recommend this rule set, knowing full well as you go in that there will not be any magic, because those magical successes aren't really magic to me. They're just a gimmick, and I would actually consider dropping them. If I was to run this, I would drop them. I would put in a couple of songs that people can learn, depending on also the roles that people have or the backgrounds. They might get a song for me that would help. So, for example, a song that would give guidance, like that, you know, that kind of thing, combat inspiration, something like that. And I really recommend this because I like the idea of playing a game in the world of Tolkien, and I like the 5th edition adaptation because it streamlines everything. And I mean, 5th edition is by far one of the most streamlined and therefore best rule sets out there, barring none. And it allows you to experience this. In the book, you will get also a little bit of an adventure. There are also there's also the map, the Dungeon Master's map, and I find it really disgusting that this is not that you can't get this as a takeout map, because this will allow you to check where your party is traveling, and then the color coding will indicate to you how dangerous it is. It comes with a really nice fold-out map of the Shire. On the one hand, I'm not going to show it, and also on the back, I think it's simply Eriador. It's beautifully drawn, and I'm a sucker for maps. I mean, I love maps, which is why it's so disgusting that they decided not to add the player map like on an A4 or even a double A4, and the Dungeon Master's map on a double A4 for takeout, so that you can easily play with it. You always have to have the book to hand, and that's something that I find disgusting. I was also unable to find it on their website. Again, that means Free Ligan is now forcing you to buy the PDF. I bought this book, and apparently, if you buy it in Sweden directly, you will get a PDF. I find it absolutely disgusting that if I buy it through my friendly local game store, I don't get it. That should be something that's available for everybody. But hey, Free League One obviously needs your money. But other than that, I really recommend it. And I think you can have a lot of fun. And yeah, if you play with this edition, let me know. If you've played with the previous 5th edition rules from Cubicle 7 and you would like to talk about the differences and how you experience those differences, also feel free to comment. Talk to you soon. Bye bye.